Welcome back to another episode of the Juicebox Podcast.
My name is Carly. I currently live in a house with 3 diabetics. I am one of them. My husband is the second, and our 6-year-old daughter is the third. We have another daughter who just turned 4, and so far she's in the clear.
Nothing you hear on the Juicebox Podcast should be considered advice, medical or otherwise. Always consult a physician before making any changes to your healthcare plan. I know this is going to sound crazy, but Blue Circle Health is a nonprofit that's offering a totally free virtual type 1 diabetes clinical care, education, and support program for adults 18 and up. You heard me right. Free. No strings attached. Just free. Currently, if you live in Florida, Maine, Vermont, Ohio, Delaware, Alabama, or Missouri, you're eligible for Blue Circle Health right now, but they are adding states quickly in 2025. So make sure to follow them at Blue Circle Health on social media and make yourself familiar with bluecirclehealth.org. Blue Circle Health is free. It is without cost. There are no strings attached. I am not hiding anything from you. bluecirclehealth.org. You know why they had to buy an ad? No one believes it's free. The show you're about to listen to is sponsored by the Eversense 365. The Eversense 365 has exceptional accuracy over 1 year and is the most accurate CGM in the low range that you can get. EversenseCGM.com/juicebox. This episode of the Juicebox Podcast is sponsored by the Omnipod 5. Learn more and get started today at omnipod.com/juicebox. Check it out. If you're looking for community around type 1 diabetes, check out the Juicebox Podcast private Facebook group, Juicebox Podcast, type 1 diabetes. But everybody is welcome. Type 1, type 2, gestational, loved ones, it doesn't matter to me. If you're impacted by diabetes and you're looking for support, comfort, or community, check out Juicebox Podcast, type 1 diabetes on Facebook.
My name is Carly. I currently live in a house with 3 diabetics. I am one of them. My husband is the second, and our 6-year-old daughter is the third.
Are there other people in the house besides the 3 of you?
We have another daughter who just turned 4, and so far she's in the clear.
Obviously a thing you're concerned about.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, we absolutely test her every now and then. And since she sees us testing ourselves, she requests it sometimes on occasion. So we'll give in to her. And so far, nothing concerning. We've also had her give some blood work before when she turned 2 in a study, and no markers so far. So she's good for now. And then we also, in December, we'll have another family member joining us. And 24 weeks pregnant right now also.
Prolific, Carly. Listen, it's funny, the way you set this up just now, you made me think of it differently than I ever have before. Meaning your 4-year-old wants to be part of the group.
She does. She feels left out sometimes.
And then you're stuck telling her, which is the best news she's ever going to hear in her life, you do not have type 1 diabetes. and you have to explain it to her, but she's disappointed by it.
She is. She is. And sometimes she'll say, I wish I had diabetes like you. And I'm like, I know you say that now, but trust me, be very glad that you don't. And it's just cute because she's 4 and she doesn't understand, but we try to include her in things. So if we're treating a low on my 6-year-old, we'll let her have a Tootsie Roll too, or something like that. So she does get a little bit extra candy here and there for treating a low for somebody else.
So interesting though, isn't it? Because, you spend your life as a parent trying not to let your kids down, and you're delivering maybe the greatest news, but you have to do it in a way that she doesn't feel let down.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Oh, that's really something. I want to understand the timeline. So how old were you when you were diagnosed?
So I was pregnant with my first, who is the 6-year-old diabetic in our house. Her name is Vienna. I was pregnant with her about 23 weeks along, age 30.
How old are you now?
36.
Oh my goodness. And your husband was how old when he was diagnosed?
He was about 15 months old. So he was a baby. He was diabetic when I met him. He was one of the first diabetics I've ever met before. And at the time I was under the impression, well, you're thin, you're in shape. How do you have diabetes? Because I didn't understand the difference between the autoimmune type 1 and then maybe the lifestyle or family
right.
genetic version of type 2. So, of course, he was happy to educate me on the difference, and I'm glad I learned the difference. And yeah, so just kind of strange that it's not like we met at a diabetic camp. We didn't meet in a support group. He was the only diabetic when we met and got married and got pregnant with our first child.
Mm-hmm.
And then before that child was born, I had been diagnosed and I found it myself. Before the glucose test was taken, I was just feeling really off and like really thirsty and running to the bathroom a lot, which is not uncommon for pregnancy. However, it just felt like something else. And I was very active at the time, exercising 5 or 6 days a week and eating pretty healthy, taking care of myself. And I've never actually tested my blood sugar. We had been together for 8 years at this point, and I've never tested my blood sugar before. I've been curious, but I'm like, I don't have a reason to check it. Why would I need to?
Right.
But something in my head, I'm like, you know what? I should really just check and just see. So I used his meter. He was not on a CGM at the time. He was doing finger sticks. So I checked my blood sugar and it was 373. And so, of course, well, that's not right. Let's wash my hands. Let's, check out another meter because he had 3 different meters. Sure enough, every time I checked, it was in the 300s. So, of course, my first thought, well, gestational diabetes. And I'm like, how did I let this happen? I'm so active. I'm so healthy. The next morning, I called my doctor and she said, you know what? That sounds too high to be gestational diabetes. I think you need to see endocrinology. So after having to make this appointment myself with no referral and being desperate and scared because I was having high blood sugars for God knows how long.
Yeah.
Nobody seemed to think it was a big deal. I'm on the phone crying with one of our major hospitals in the Milwaukee area. And I said, hey, I need to get in. I don't have diabetes. My blood sugar is over 300 and I'm pregnant. What can you do for me? And finally they said, okay, we'll get you in tomorrow. And I went in and I think they initially thought too, okay, this is gestational. They had me meet with a dietitian, write down all the things I was eating, how active I was. And after they found that out, they said, this sounds like type 1. So
you're like, thank you. I appreciate you listening.
Yeah, that's what I thought. But I had the endocrinologist came in and saw me, and then they ran all the blood testing. I had the GAD antibodies tested, C-peptide tested. And although my antibodies were still, I think, on the low side, I think they were like 77. Mm-hmm. Obviously still positive though. So I was diagnosed on the spot and met with a diabetes educator that day and just kind of trying to absorb everything, how my life is going to completely change from the previous 30 years. And I remember pulling into the pharmacy, picking up my prescriptions and just crying in my car, to be completely honest. I had a bag full of medication and pen needles and testing supplies. And I said, how did this happen to me? How? I have no family history. I had only known about 3 type 1 diabetics in my entire life. How did this happen to me?
I do wonder now that you've had it for a while, is there other, have you been able to identify any other autoimmune issues in your family?
So we did, one autoimmune issue I did know in our family history was psoriasis. So my mom would have like nothing serious, like patches here and there. And then I would get the same. And then when I was in high school or just after high school, I got a vaccine, the Gardasil vaccine, and I broke out in full body psoriasis. So I think that it was autoimmune condition number 1 for me. And then the type 1, number 2, as we all know, they like to run together with other autoimmune diseases. So the psoriasis runs in the family. Otherwise, nothing else, no type 1.
Carly, I don't want to sound like a conspiracy theorist, but I think I've got this figured out. Your husband's sperm makes people type 1.
It's funny. We have joked about that.
I bet you have.
Like, is it contagious? And not talking about the sperm part. However, he did have 2 male friends, just friends, in school that also were diagnosed after he was. So not.
It took me a minute to figure out why you were being so careful about telling the rest of the story. Yeah. And I was like, that's because of my stupid joke. You can see how crazy it is. But then after you recognize that you have type 1 and he has it, do you immediately think our kid's going to have it or no? My daughter is 20 years old. I can't even believe it. She was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes when she was 2, and she put her first insulin pump on when she was 4. That insulin pump was an Omnipod. and it's been an Omnipod every day since then. That's 16 straight years of wearing Omnipod. It's been a friend to us, and I believe it could be a friend to you. Omnipod.com/juicebox. Whether you get the Omnipod DASH or the automation that's available with the Omnipod 5, you are going to enjoy tubeless insulin pumping. You're going to be able to jump into a shower or a pool or a bathtub without taking off your pump. That's right, you will not have to disconnect to bathe with an Omnipod. You also won't have to disconnect to play a sport or to do anything where a regular tube pump has to come off. Arden has been wearing an Omnipod for 16 years. She knows other people that wear different pumps, and she has never once asked the question, should I be trying a different pump? Never once. Omnipod.com/juicebox. Get a pump that you'll be happy with forever. Today's episode is sponsored by a long-term CGM that's going to help you to stay on top of your glucose readings, the Eversense 365. I'm talking, of course, about the world's first and only CGM that lasts for 1 year. 1 year, one CGM. Are you tired of those other CGMs? The ones that give you all those problems that you didn't expect? Knocking them off, false alerts, not lasting as long as they're supposed to? If you're tired of those constant frustrations, use my link, eversensecgm.com/juicebox to learn more about the Eversense 365. Some of you may be able to experience the Eversense 365 for as low as $199 for a full year. At my link, you'll find those details and can learn about eligibility. eversensecgm.com/juicebox. Check it out.
It absolutely crossed our minds. It wasn't enough to stop me from wanting a second right away. We had our second. They're about 2 years, 6 weeks apart. Mm-hmm. Our first, Vienna, was not type 1 when our second was born. And there was no question. I'm like, we're going to have a second one. I'm not that worried about it. I know the chances are elevated, but it wasn't enough to scare me from having more children. My oldest is now 2, almost 3. Our youngest is 9 months old. And 2-year-olds are intense and crazy. And she's a girl. So I'm like, she's a little crazy. She's got attitude. She's feisty, but she was also having accidents. And she was not herself. And so take out the meter, test her blood, 250. So first thing I did was cry, to be honest. Then I called my mom and I cried some more. And then I called the doctor and we got into her pediatrician the next day. They took all of her blood work. By the end of the day, we had a type 1 diagnosis. However, it was very early. Her A1C was only 5.9. So we were really, keyed in on the signs and symptoms. And same with me. When I was pregnant, I was diagnosed at an A1C of 6.4. Mm-hmm. So again, caught very early. I caught it before they even gave me the glucose test. I had it on my counter, never had to take it. I just returned it the next time I went in.
Finally saving some money. Yeah.
Yeah, there you go. They probably still charge me for it, though.
Oh, I bet they did.
But yeah, so then that was the third type 1 in our family, diagnosed at 2 years old.
Okay. Jeez. Are you all like managing similarly, or do you have different pumps, or how does that work?
Yeah, so we all are on currently the Dexcom G7, and my husband is on the Omnipod 5. He does it all in manual mode, though. Mm-hmm. He doesn't do any of the the automated stuff. I know you can't with the G7, but he never has done it that way. He likes to have control over, what he's punching into the pump. He doesn't want it to go on its own. So for me, well, right now I'm 24 weeks pregnant, so I'm more in like an insulin resistance phase right now. However, when I'm not pregnant, I'm not taking very much insulin. I'm usually taking maybe 8 units a day.
Okay.
So I'm still honeymooning even after 6 years.
Yeah.
I think I just caught it that early.
Did you hear that interview I did with the Lotta guy? He had type 1, but he had pretty, fairly low insulin needs. And then they ramped up, and then they gave him Mounjaro for his weight loss, and he's not using insulin at the moment.
Oh, wow. No, I didn't.
Crazy. And I mean, not that he won't at some point. Like, I'm not saying that, I'm not saying the GLP like cured his type 1 or anything like that. But like at the moment, he's not using insulin, and it's been for a bit. So it's really interesting because your needs are still, I would say, I agree with you. They're low for having had type 1 for that long. Like maybe you are Lotta.
Yeah, I think a lot of times if you catch it early enough and there's still some pancreatic function. Now, I'm not a doctor. I have no medical background besides just everyday living our life with diabetes. But I think a lot of times it can almost be treated like type 2, whereas I think if you can kind of control it a little bit by diet, because if I'm eating a lot lower carb, I take a lot less insulin. The insulin resistance just improves. Now, of course, it's not a cure, and I'm still going to need insulin. I would still take the basal insulin no matter what. But depending on activity or what I'm eating, I can absolutely cut my insulin needs down.
Yeah. And most people see that, but you see it pretty drastically is what you're saying.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, right now I'm on 3 times as much insulin as I was before I was pregnant. And that's just the way it goes. And now this is my 3rd time around in this part of pregnancy with diabetes. So I know it goes way up and then it comes right back down. And then especially after giving birth, it's going to go way down with nursing and everything. That's what happens every other time.
Yeah.
And then my daughter, she still takes like quarter units of insulin for corrections.
Mm-hmm.
That's how sensitive she is to insulin usually, unless she's battling an illness. So she and I are both on daily injections, just because I don't think the pump makes sense for either of us, because we take such little doses of insulin. So yeah, so we're all on the Dexcom CGM, but only one of us is on the pod. And so, as you can imagine, 3 people on CGM, there are very few nights where there's nobody beeping.
I figured the mail comes to your house. There's like one of those heavy stickers on the side of the CGM delivery, so the mail carrier doesn't hurt themselves. Yeah.
The number of those coolers with the ice packs that we accrue in 6 months, it's amazing.
Carly's like, listen, we're losing a lot of money in the CGMs, but we have a burgeoning Etsy business where we resell ice packs, making a ton of money.
Yep.
Well, I have to ask, like, how much of your day is absorbed by diabetes?
A lot. I would say, so my 6-year-old has had it now for just over 3 years. And in the beginning, it was a lot more like staring at my phone. Well, because she's not home with me. She, at the time, was going to daycare. Now, over the summer, she's in daycare. And then in the fall, she'll go back to school. So she's not with me a lot of the time. So I'm on the follow app a lot. But I would say it's definitely gone down over the years, just as you get more comfortable. And we're kind of the family that, while I'm a perfectionist and I strive for like the most perfect blood sugars for her, not always for me. I feel like I'm always putting her like her diabetes is more important than mine, because it's your kid, right? Like you got to do the best you can for them. I stay very involved, and luckily our local school that she goes to, they're great. The nurse is great there. She's okay that I'm really involved. We're a few minutes down the road. I can always run there if I need to. So I would say, I mean, I'm checking my phone. I would say I'm probably mostly on my phone checking blood sugars, like, than doing anything else.
Okay.
Probably.
I'm going to say no based on his response to an automated pump, but are you following your husband?
So I'm not. No, I suggested it once before just because he was having some lows, and I think maybe I don't know if I was out of town or something. And I'm like, hey, do you want me to, I think he was out of town on a work trip. And I said, hey, do you want me to follow you and just make sure everything's okay? And because he was having a lot of really severe lows. I never ended up doing it. He just would check in with me, to make sure he was okay. No, I only follow my daughter, and he only follows my daughter. We don't follow each other.
Yeah, that was going to be my next question. Would you let him follow you?
I would.
Yeah.
If he wanted to.
Mm-hmm. Do you think he doesn't want to follow you, or do you think he doesn't want to set a precedent so you start asking about following him again?
That might be it. And, he's an adult.
Sure.
I micromanage so much with my daughter's diabetes and my own. I don't want to become obsessive over his blood sugars. If I notice he's high, like overnight, if I'm treating a low on my daughter or high on my daughter, I'll wake him up. And obviously if he's low, if he's beeping, I'll wake him up because he sleeps through a lot of the alarms. But I'm not going to actively help him manage, because he knows how it goes. He's been doing this for 35 years. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I trust him to handle it.
So do you even, trust me, I'm getting to something, but do you even know what his A1C is, for example?
I do. We do share it with each other when we have our visits. We'll come home and we'll talk about it. And I think he's in the low 6s, which I believe is the best it's ever been. Mm-hmm. So he's really proud of that. So he'll come home and say, oh, it's this. So yeah, so we're kind of like, we're not in competition with each other for best A1C or anything like that, but we will celebrate the wins when they are there.
Yeah, no, of course. And you the same. You'll be like, hey, I had like, so it's almost like that end of the day conversation. You're like, what I bumped into today? I saw, like, you're almost like, hey, I was at the doctor today. I got my A1C back. Like it's kind of that not focused, but still spoken about.
Yeah. And,
okay.
Or anything, right? Like he said to me this morning, he's like, this hasn't happened to me in years. And he showed me his graph and he was completely flat in like the 70s and 80s all night last night. And I was like, hell yeah, that's awesome. Like that's something to be celebrated too, because that doesn't always happen.
Yeah.
Obviously.
It's the weirdest thing to high five somebody over, but there you go. Yeah.
Absolutely. We bond a lot over diabetes. It dominates a lot of our conversations.
What about the tough parts of it? Like when you are struggling or he was struggling with lows, like, do you find yourself going to him and saying, I need a second set of eyes on this? And then do you do that together, the two of you? And are you guys involved in your daughter's care together, or is it specific to one of you?
So for our daughter, it's definitely both of us. I have the more perfectionist personality, so I'm going to be the one more looking at detailed things and trying to find trends and trying to brainstorm other ways that we can have a better blood sugar day or something like that. But he's certainly involved too. I don't sleep through the night. Even if there's no beeping, I'll still wake up eventually through the night. If she's high, if our daughter's high, I'll go correct her. And I'm not going to wake him up to go do that. Like we don't share. If I notice it, I'll take care of it.
Yeah.
And then as far as for each other, really just he was having those bad lows for a while. And so I was kind of taking more notice to him and trying to help him out more. For me, with the pregnancy, it was more battling the highs. And now I've got that back down where I'm comfortable. So I would say he probably doesn't have any part in mine there.
It's the middle of the night and beep, beep, beep. And you wake up and he's not low, but drifting low, right? Like he's 80 and you look at his graph and you're like, oh, he's going to be 70 soon. Would you pick up they don't call it a PDM anymore. Would you pick up his controller and like do a temp basal off for a half an hour or something like that without telling him?
I would not, because I don't know how to work the pump. So I don't want to screw anything up. So I would wake him up and say, hey,
I got you.
I don't know what needs to be done. Can you do something here?
Yeah. You wouldn't have trouble going, I woke up, I saw your graph. Man, it looks like you're going to be low. Like, here, get ahead of it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
All right.
Yeah, that happens a lot, especially because, like I said, he sleeps through a lot of the alarms. I have had 2 times, 3 times maybe in the past year and a half where I was unable to wake him up.
Because of a low or just because he was sleeping?
A low. Yeah. And I was trying to figure out how to turn off his basal. And then I thought maybe I should just rip his pump off because I want to make sure it's not giving him more insulin. So in those 2 instances that happened overnight, you're racking your brain like, okay, do I use the glucagon? Do I call 911? Do I try to treat him myself? Mm-hmm. So what I've done 2 times is I've gotten glucose, I guess, crushed up glucose tablets in his cheek.
Yeah.
And kind of rubbed it in and then gotten.
Carly, they make a gel if you want to get it.
And I think we do have that. I don't know why I didn't think about that, but we have it's like in a like a little aluminum packet or something. We do have some kind of gel because we got it for our daughter for school in case she had a severe low at school.
Right.
But at the time, it's like 2 a.m. That's what I thought.
It is weird where your brain goes sometimes. It really, it really is. And
I'm like, and you think practically too, like, well, okay, 2 kids sleeping in the house. Like, what are my options here? So I felt comfortable enough to try to treat him myself first. And after I loaded his cheek up with the powder, I tested his blood sugar and I think it was like in the 40s or something like that, or in the maybe upper 30s. Mm-hmm. So I knew I probably had some time to treat it. And then he got to the point both times where he was able to then follow commands. Hey, chew this, drink this. And then he was able to do that. So yeah, those are scary times. And then, but I didn't know how to operate the pump to turn it off or anything like that. So once he came to, I said, hey, maybe you need to adjust your settings because I wasn't sure what to do. I didn't rip it off, didn't rip the pod off. I was going to, but didn't end up doing it. And then just kind of leave it in his hands once he's able to.
Right. Also, maybe we should do a training at a lunch sometime where you explain to me how to work this thing a little bit.
I wouldn't mind it. I think that's probably important.
Yeah. Boys, you know what I mean, Carly? And once your husband is incapacitated like that, you have to help him. Does it change how you see him? You know what I mean? Like that. I know this is going to sound strange to some people, but that masculine feeling you have about him, does it lessen? Like when you see his humanity and like his, like how easily he could have just slipped away. Do you know what I mean? Like, am I making sense, first of all?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. The first time or two that this has happened, I just felt really scared, and he was very grateful that I was there to help him. And it was kind of like a bonding moment. Like, life is fleeting. Make sure you say you love each other before you go to bed, all that like gooey crap, right? When this was happening more and more frequently, I would just get frustrated and say, hey, we have children. What if I'm gone and this happens to you? I actually taught my oldest how to call 911 from her phone. Just recently, we just got her a phone number just so that we could see her numbers when she's not on Wi-Fi. But previously, I mean, this is like brand new, like as in like 10 days ago, we did this.
Yeah.
So previously, she could only make emergency calls. So I showed her how to do that. If daddy doesn't wake up, call 911. This is how you do it. If I'm not here, or, run to the next door neighbor's house or whatever, So, I mean, it was frustrating because I was scared to leave him alone with the kids. Like if I had something for work where I was out of town.
Right.
And I'm like, again, too, like you've had this for 35 years. Like why is this happening now? I don't remember these things ever happening to him before. And we've been together now for 14 years. So yeah.
Maybe you should switch that thing over into auto and let it help him stop his slows.
We talked about that too. And I think there is a reason behind these extreme lows. We actually just recently found out in the last couple of weeks, he has a lot of symptoms of what we think is primary adrenal insufficiency.
Oh, wow. Look at you figuring things out. Excellent for you.
Yeah. So he was in the hospital twice in the last 18 months with low sodium and like low blood pressure. And just looking back, all the symptoms make sense now. These extreme lows he's been having where he is completely blacked out, catatonic. It's all part of this. So he was at his endocrinologist this morning to get more information, but he started on a steroid over the weekend and he's already feeling better.
Good.
And then I feel kind of terrible. I'm like, well, shoot, we didn't know that there is another.
But I was telling you to pull
issue.
your together. I didn't know about that. Sorry.
Exactly. I'm like, now I feel like an a-hole.
Nah. Listen, that's a good catch. How did you guys figure that out?
So interestingly enough, he had just like been feeling so crappy for a few weeks. And finally I said, hey, you know what? I think you need to go in, get some blood work done. Something's not right. The morning after his blood work, his doctor called him about 6 a.m. from home and said, hey, you got to go to the ER. Your sodium is 116, I think it was.
Mm-hmm.
He's like, you got to go. This is an emergency. So he went, and I had my endocrinologist visit up to just like a follow-up in pregnancy that morning. So I had to bring the kids with me. So I apologized. I said, hey, I'm sorry to bring the kids, but my husband's in the hospital. She's like, oh, what's going on? So I explained a little bit, and she's like, are they testing him for primary adrenal insufficiency? And it's like, I'm like, I don't know. Do you think I should tell them to?
Try text them. They will be. Hold on a second.
Yeah.
That was
so
it.
I did.
Wow.
And lo and behold, I mean, just kind of funny. She's never met him before, never treated him. 3 symptoms I described, and that's the first thing she thought of. And sure enough, we don't have the official diagnosis, but I mean, that's where it looks like it's heading. Like cortisol is nearly 0. ACTH, I think is the other one, is sky high. So it sounds like that's what it is. And so now he has his second autoimmune disease. Yay.
Trust me, there'll be more.
Don't say that.
Hardin's nurse practitioner, her very first nurse practitioner, figured out that Kelly had hypothyroidism.
Really?
Yeah. I was just talking to her one day, and she said she's the first time, her name was Sakina. Was that her name? No. I'll figure out her name because she deserves credit. A large portion of what I do on the podcast is because of her, because she said that day something that had never been said to me before. Did you know that people with type 1 diabetes often you'll find other autoimmune issues throughout their families? And I was like, oh, I didn't know that. And then I said, my wife, blah, blah, blah. And she goes, yeah, you should probably look into like a thyroid issue for your wife. Like she's the first person who like said that to me out loud.
Wow.
So, yeah.
Isn't it interesting? Like a third party that's like not involved at all is like, hey, what about this? And then it's spot on.
She was just like sharing information with me, and I put some things together, asked another question. She made a statement. And then, as people with thyroid know, sometimes it's hard to get doctors to help them. It took us like 7 years for a doctor to give my wife medication. But yeah, that was the problem. So, geez.
Interesting.
Yeah. It's really something. And I'm not picking on your husband, by the way, but in general, Listen, I was a stay-at-home dad I became a stay-at-home father when Kelly was in her third trimester with Cole. He's 24 now. And I started this podcast 10 years ago, and my kids would tell you I'm not much of a stay-at-home dad anymore. They're also older, so they can cook for themselves. But I was a stay-at-home dad my entire adult life, basically. I was doing it before it was a thing. I was doing it, you didn't know another guy that was doing it. Like, I was early to the party, and I did it for a very long time. My wife still looks at me like I don't know what I'm doing with the kids. She'll still be like, what are you doing here? And I'm like, you like before COVID and they sent everybody home to work, you were never involved in anything. Like, I raised these children. Not that you weren't here, but let's be honest, Carly, between you and me, right? Like, I was me pretty much for 90% of it. And she still looks at me like, what's dummy going to mess up? So it really struck me when you were like, hey, if I leave the kids with you and you can't wake up, what are we doing here? Because you already did, you wouldn't have trusted him if he didn't have diabetes, is what I was going to say. But does it work in reverse? But going back to my initial question, have you ever been so low that he's needed to help you? And do you think that that's changed your relationship at all?
I had one instance about a year ago where I did the age-old mistake where I gave my basal dose, but I did it at the fast-acting insulin before bed. And he did go and get me orange juice from the gas station. And he made sure that, I was good. And I think I had to eat maybe 175 carbs or something to make up the difference.
Yeah.
So I just did it slowly. I took lots of notes. I never was not in control. If that makes sense.
Yeah, I understand.
I'm watching the graph. I'm pricking my finger every half an hour. I'm eating slowly because I didn't want to totally blast my body with all these carbs because I didn't think I'd actually need that many.
Yeah.
So anyway, but he was there with me. He made sure I was okay.
How did you know to handle that so well? Because people freak out a lot of times when they do that.
Honestly, I'm not great at math, but I'm like, you know what? I think if I just treat this like a math problem, if I accidentally did 175 carbs worth of insulin, I should plan to eat about 175 carbs over the next 4 hours. I know that the insulin's going to wear off in about 4 hours completely, peaks in an hour, starts going downhill after that. After 4 hours, I'm good to go. So yeah, just kind of approaching it from a logical standpoint, try not to freak out. However, we did do that once with my daughter too. And I can tell you I was not as calm in that situation because she was sleeping and
she's little.
Yeah. But I think at the time she was probably on oh my gosh, a unit and a half of basal, which was probably 60 carbs for her. So it wasn't as hard to make up her difference. But I remember too, I was doing intermittent fasting at the time and I'm like, damn it, I'm breaking my perfect fast. I had a great day. My blood sugars were so good. And, and I'm like, I totally shit the bed on this. And now I have to totally blow it and eat all this sugar and crap.
I think that experience can be, I've had this thought frequently, but I think that experience, I know it starts as a mistake, but if it's handled the way you handled it, I think it levels up your understanding of diabetes. Because you would never sit down for a 175 carb meal because you'd say, oh gosh, that's a lot of insulin. I don't know how it's going to work. And you would, not that you should, I'm not saying that a meal should be 175 carbs, but I mean, you know what I mean? You would never do that on purpose. But the minute it happened by mistake, you were like, well, all I really did here was bolus for a meal of 175 carbs. So what's the difference between a 40 carb meal and a 100 carb meal? You thought about it backwards, which is a thing that I try to ask people to do sometimes in the pro tip series and stuff. Don't just think about how does the insulin impact the carbs. Wonder about how the carbs impacts the insulin so that you can kind of think of it more holistically, which is what you did. It's well done. So my brother lives in Wisconsin, probably pretty close to where you live.
Okay.
And I visited. The food there I had trouble eating at a restaurant when I was there.
Really?
For all the fried options, not a lot of not fried options. Is that your finding or was I just in the wrong places?
I mean, there's definitely a lot of fried options, definitely a lot of cheese. But I mean, I think with the whole healthy eating trend, the gluten-free, the allergy-friendly. There's a ton of those kind of places popping up.
Okay.
And I think too, just a lot of options on like typical menus where they've got where you can have a lettuce wrap instead of, a bun or whatever. So we don't eat out a ton just because it's like absolute like hell on the blood sugar, especially for our daughter. No matter what she eats, that's out. I mean, I don't know what they put in food, but like did you go to Culver's when you were here, or have you been to a Culver's? I know they're not just in Wisconsin anymore.
I don't think I was. No.
That's one of her favorite places, and yeah, it's about 100 carb meal for her, which is we never. I mean, this is like treats, right? We never do this kind of stuff. But we know if she's eating Culver's, she's got to eat it by like 5:30 p.m. because we're going to be up for at least 8 hours babysitting her blood sugar, because she will have like 3 or 4 waves of highs coming from the French fries or the fattiness in the cheeseburger, the fattiness in the custard. So yeah, we don't eat out a ton because of that. But I will say that was I've probably listened to that podcast at least 3 times about the delayed fat rise. I don't remember what it's called, but like surfing those fat waves and protein like over several hours and trying to understand how the body metabolizes that differently than carbohydrates. That is one that I have listened to multiple times.
Yeah, a lot of people say that actually. And it's great information for people, mostly because doctors they don't bring that up ever. It's count the carbs, put in the insulin. That's it. Wait 3 hours. If you're still high, okay, you can bolus again. It's pretty much the end of it.
The first time I learned about this was on the Facebook support page.
Yeah.
I never knew you had to bolus differently for fat.
Yeah, no, I know. I don't think anybody knows. So, but hey, why tell anybody, right?
I know. It's only your life and your health. No big deal.
No reason to bring it up. So you don't eat like that very frequently. I don't know. I found myself out. I had a very like basic thought when I was out. I was like, I don't understand how everybody here doesn't have type 2 diabetes. Like this food is rough. And just like you said, cheese and grease. And like, I'm like, my God, this got to be hard on people. And I did find myself thinking, I don't know how I could take Arden to a restaurant here. She wasn't with me, but it would have been well, I guess just like you described, actually. And not that it's specific to one place, but it's always stuck in my head because when I first met my sister-in-law, she was like, oh, I brought like a treat that, it's a thing my mom and I make at Christmas time. And it was, the pretend popcorn you can buy in the grocery store. They're almost like packing peanuts. You know what I mean?
Oh, sure.
Right. And she brought them soaked in caramel sugar.
Oh, wow.
And she was like, yeah, we make these at Christmas. And I was like, to murder each other with? I was like, what like, what is this exactly? But it was just like, as I was talking to her about it, and I don't think she'd be embarrassed. Like, it was just a family tradition. And I was like, oh my gosh, that's crazy. And it made me wonder like what other things exist in other places. And then people come on, like very frequently, people like Mexican heritage come on and they talk about how they eat. And they're like, I have diabetes and everything I eat is hard. And, but this is what we eat. Like, it's usually how it goes after that. So anyway, okay. So what makes you want to come on? Like, you feel like this is a pretty like rare thing, being one, married to one, parent of one?
Yeah, I think when I think about our story, and I always have to specify, I got type 1 in pregnancy, not gestational diabetes.
Right.
Like there's always I always have to make sure people understand that. And so I thought it was kind of rare. I've never met anybody in our situation. So yeah, and just kind of, I'm sure this comes up a lot and I've seen it posted before where people are worried about having another type 1 child when they already have one and maybe holding off from having more children. And I will tell you, after our first was diagnosed, we already had our second, so no going back there. But when we were debating on a third, we always wanted a third. But it took, almost a year, I think, of like soul searching, praying, talking to doctors, talking to family, friends. What would you do? Would you have another child knowing that this child or, the one we already had was going to get diabetes too? There came a time where I'm like, it's too cruel. I can't bring another child into this world knowing that they might have this lifelong sentence, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then I think, honestly, through a lot of prayer and a lot of thinking about it, and I'm like, whether or not it's diabetes, it could be anything else. It could be cerebral palsy. It could be cancer. It could be any number of things, any number of birth defects. There's so much out there. Is it really worth not having not completing our family like we think on a chance that we could have another diabetic or two in the family. We ultimately decided, it's not like it's not worth not. I think we would always regret not having another child.
Okay. Yeah.
So that's a big thing too. I think it's important for people who are on the fence too to think about it that way. If it's not this, it could be this, or it could be that.
Listen, I've heard people work it through from both perspectives, and I've understood every decision that people have come to. I get it when people say, I just don't want to take the risk. And I get it when people say, well, I have diabetes and I'm okay. And they'll be okay too. I understand. I really do. I understand every perspective on it. So,
yeah, I think it's important not to be discouraged if having another child is something you really, really want. And I think too, right? You have to take responsibility, just like financial responsibility before you have a child. Make sure you know what you're doing. You're controlling it the best you can. You're going to give your future child the best start in life and set them off the best way you can, whether it's anything, right? I mean, it's not just limited to like a medical thing. It's anything, financial responsibility, or just being a kind person or whatever. Like it's your job to mold this person. And if you're taking that commitment to do that, then yeah.
Hey, listen, Carly, it's like everything else in life. If it turns out great, you'll look like a genius. And if it doesn't turn out well, well, then you screwed up. So
yeah, talk to me in 10 years and we'll see how many more diabetics we have. Hopefully 0.
Yeah, exactly. Well, no, like
we're ready.
25 years from now, when your middle kid is like, I don't know, like, doing so incredibly well, you'll be like, see, we did the right thing. And, somebody else's kid's going to be shooting heroin with their insulin needles and they're going to be like, oh, I knew we shouldn't have had another kid.
Oh, man. Yeah.
You can't. Life is going to be what it's going to be. And
right.
You get in front of it and you do what you did. You think about things and make informed decisions. And then along the way, there's going to be twists and turns, and you're going to have to keep thinking and keep making more decisions. And just hopefully you bump and nudge your life well enough that it ends up in a place that you look at and go, wow, that went okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's pretty much it as far as I'm concerned. I don't think you can control things. I don't think you can stop bad things from happening any more than you can make good things happen. So
just do the best you can.
Best decision on the day, and then just keep paying attention and hope it ends up somewhere. You talked earlier about crying in your car, which seemed to be a theme for you at some point. And I thought to tell you, even though it was completely disconnected from this, I'll share it with you here. I cried in my car last night.
Oh no, I'm sorry to hear that.
Don't be sorry. I ran out for something, and I started thinking about like my son's situation and how he's just probably not going to be around much anymore, because just of his age and where he is in life and everything. And man, it made me upset, and I was like, oh, I just found myself thinking, I just need a little more time. You know what I mean? Like here in this space, like, how do I stay here a little longer without adversely impacting his life? Like, I want him to move forward and grow and all that stuff. I want that for everybody, but I'd like to stay here just a little longer. And then that made me somehow I think I was really tired. I think that's important to point out. You shouldn't think about things like this when you're tired. And then I thought like, oh, perfect time. If he was 6 and Arden was 1, she wouldn't have diabetes. Like, I'd like to sit in the living room for a couple of days like that. Just everybody just sit there, and I made myself all upset. Anyway, I was embarrassed for myself, and I was by myself. Anyway,
I feel like as a parent, you have those times where you're just like, man, where did the time go? I will tell you though, I have not once taken for granted handing my 4-year-old a snack and not having to think about weighing it, how much medicine she needs to eat it. Whenever it's just her and I can just hand her something, oh man, it is like the best feeling in the world.
Arden had to change a device last night, and Arden got sick like a week or so ago. Like tonsil, like her throat was crazy. It looked like tonsillitis, strep throat, like something like that.
Aww.
And she went to the doctor, and the doctor's like, oh God, that's horrible. She's like, yeah, great. But with test, not strep throat. It's not this. It's not mono. It's nothing. It's just a viral thing. Like, it'll end. And they just sent her home to suffer, basically.
Yeah.
And she slept on a chair in the living room for 3 days. She wouldn't even get up and go to bed at night. and just wrecked, like really wrecked. Her blood sugars were bouncing and like everything was a mess. And she suffered, I think, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. But last Friday, we had to, and I mean had to, go to Georgia to get her stuff out of her apartment. She's not going back to school there. We only had the room for a certain day. And I'm like, we needed 2 cars to accomplish this. It's a 700-mile drive one way. And it had to be 2 cars. Like, it's not a thing I could do on my own. And I was like, what are we going to do, And she just stood up on Thursday and she's like, all right, we're going tomorrow. And I was like, I don't think you should. She goes, what are the other options? And I was like, I don't know. So she drove with, by herself in a car. I drove by myself in a car. We went 700 miles. We drove I think we drove 8 hours the first day. We slept a few hours, got up, drove, the other 7 hours or whatever, got there, had dinner, went to sleep, woke up at 5 a.m, packed our cars up and drove straight home. It was like 14 hours home.
Gosh.
And in the last hours of the trip, I'm talking about from like Baltimore to home, it was in the middle of that torrential rainstorm that happened. So like there were times where we were just like, we didn't even know where we were driving. Like, I'm not lying. We got to a rest stop at one point. Like, we just had to take a break in the middle of it. And Arden goes, I was following you. I did not know where I was on the road. And
wow.
Yeah, it was like really bad. Right. Anyway, yesterday we go to her endo appointment because we're like stuffing in her endo appointment before she goes back to college so we can make sure we have like everything we need. And the endo looks at her and goes, and this is where most of you are not going to be lucky because Arden's endo is a concierge doctor. We pay her cash. We turn it into our insurance later. You get like an hour-long, visit with her. And she also helps Arden with her thyroid. And, she's a really good doctor. And she looks at Arden and she goes, honey, what's wrong? And Arden's like, I have, like, because she can barely talk. And the woman's like, oh my God, let me see. And she looks in her throat and she goes, there's plaque back there on your tonsil. And, you have strep. And Arden goes, they told me I didn't have strep. And the woman's like, and she's like, gave her a prescription for, an antibiotic. And she's like, do we want to, do you think we should get your lungs x-rayed? I hear kind of like a hollow spot in your lung, but you're getting air all the way down, but like just really good medical care. You know what I mean?
It's awesome.
Yeah. And then we do everything, blah, 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 for the endo appointment. That all goes well. Also, I'll tell you one other thing we talked about while we were there. This is going to be a long way to the story. Arden's taking a GLP, which she initially started taking for insulin resistance. It ended up helping with PCOS symptoms, very specifically, really bad acne, which is completely gone now. It helps her with her periods. It really eliminates a lot of her insulin need, about 20% of her insulin need, just changes everything. But she had lost weight to the point where we were like, this is not like, she lost too much weight, And so we took her off it for the last month so she could regain some weight. And then we are putting her back on it, but not at the dose that comes in the injectable pen. We're limiting it by giving her less. And for people who want to know how that happens, here at the house, we are injecting the pen into a clean, sterile vial and then drawing out some with an insulin needle and giving it to her that way. And just sit there and have this great conversation with the doctor who's like, yeah, that's great. Like, what did you start with? I said, I started with like 0.125, like half of it. And, we just talked about, how we're going to watch it. We're going to watch to see when our insulin needs change in the week. We're going to decide that that's going to be the next injection day. So if we can get it to go longer than 7 days or whatever, like, and you're talking to like an intelligent person who's willing to figure out a problem and not just say, well, the box says this, or, like that kind of thing. And you're sitting there.
Oh, yeah. Those are hard to find.
Yeah. Right. And you're sitting there feeling really lucky about all this and really lucky. Like Arden, I'm telling you the story because Arden is in the best situation a person with type 1 diabetes could be, right? But last night, sitting there sick before the antibiotic had kicked in or anything, she had to change a device. And I watched her face. She was like, oh, like not now. You know what I mean? Like I don't feel good. I haven't felt well for a week and a half. I just did this trip back and forth. I'm exhausted. I'm tired. Like, I can't believe I've got to change this device right now. It's the simplest thing. And still, it only took a couple of minutes. But you made me think of that whole story when you said, it's not lost on me that I can hand a snack to my other kid and not think about it.
Yeah.
You said that. It made me think of this entire week. And people are never going to know the impacts of type 1, even when you have it worked out and you're doing really well. It's still impactful significantly, I think.
Absolutely. Once you throw a wrench, like the sickness or, even the road trip on its own without being ill, the stress of that, any of that, I mean, it's amazing how much your well-oiled machine is just seems to can go haywire a little bit. And then it just seems like the worst thing in the world to even think about like changing your device or doing anything that's management.
I just want people to know that so they can have some grace for their kids or, spouses or whoever, when they're like, when you say things like, oh, they don't bolus for their meals. Like people say it like, oh, I have a problem with my kid. They don't bolus or they won't pre-bolus. And it all sounds so simple. And listen, it is. It's like, it's not simple just to pre-bolus until you take all this other stuff into account. And like you just said, like after 10 hours in the car with like 3 or 4 more to go when we drove into this terrible rainstorm, like we were bolusing just for the adrenaline of driving in the rain for hours. I was like, I'm like texting her. I'm like, the next time we slow down or something, like put a couple more units in. And then as soon as we got done with that drive, as soon as we got to our house, her blood sugar started falling like crazy as soon as the adrenaline was gone. And, so we fed it and everything. But even that, like we're home, Jesus, it's like 1 a.m. We finally got home. We're all sitting on my bed because Kelly's like already in bed, and we came in and sat down, and I was like, Arden, you're going to get low like really soon. And she's like, she looked at me a little like, she's getting older now. So she looked at me like, I don't need your help, buddy. I've lived on my own. And, and I get it. But I was like, no, seriously, we put a ton of insulin in for all that adrenaline while we were driving. The adrenaline's gone now. I see it already. You're getting low. It's going to happen. And she's like, yeah. And then she ate this little pack of like cookies. And I'm sitting there thinking, that's not going to do it. Like that's not enough. It's not fast acting enough, and it's not enough carbs. It's just like, it was maybe like 12 carbs. And I was just like, that's not going to work. Do I say something? She already, like, we just went through this whole thing. We're exhausted. Like, I don't want to be telling her what to do. But she kept drifting down. And I was like, Arden, this is it. I'm like, you need something fast acting. And she said to me, I live by myself with this. I know what to do. But it wasn't anger. It was, she was exhausted, and it came out very matter-of-factly. And I recognized it as, you might know this, and people listening might know this, but like if you get low, you can get that, oh, I guess I'm going to die. Like that, like, you know what I mean? Like your concern for yourself can go away. Does that make sense? Have you ever, you seen that?
Yeah.
And I recognized that on her face. Like she wasn't complaining to me as her dad who's bugging her. She was drifting into that, like, whoa, I guess it's okay if I go. Like, and I was like, so I just stopped talking to her. I got up. I got things to fix the low blood sugar with. I grabbed her stuff. I was like, we're going to test your blood sugar. You're drinking this and you're going to have all that. And she was just like, okay. Like she got into that like, okay thing. And no kidding. Like her CGM said 60, but the finger stick was 44. And I knew, I could tell just by that little change in her personality, like that it was happening, but I've seen it before. So I know what it looks like. And we stopped the low right there. Like, it was not a big deal. And we leveled it off, and that was all good. But then all I could think of was her words from earlier. I live alone. I know what to do. And I kept thinking, except in the one situation where you didn't. And then it's something I'm going to worry about the rest of my life. You know what I mean?
Yeah. That sounds a lot like my husband too, where he's like, yeah, I treated it. I'm good. I'm like, okay, well, you're still not, I can tell something's wrong. Like, you're not all there. Sit down. And a lot of times I have to be like, sit down, drink this. Mm-hmm. Because he's just like, I'm fine. I'm good. Now, Vienna, on the other hand, the spicy 6-year-old, she gets like angry and like thrashy and yells a lot when she's low. That's how we know she's having a bad low, because she gets crazy, like huge. She throws a huge tantrum, and she just has no control over her body. It's just so interesting how it's different. It's so different for different people.
Yeah.
We always know, like, if she starts throwing a fit, we're like, all right, let's check your blood sugar. And typically, yeah, I mean, she's having a really bad low, and then trying to tell someone like that to do something, that's like the last thing they want to do. So you got to try to make it like it's their idea. Play the little toddler reverse psychology game, or little kid reverse psychology game.
They get older, it stops working though.
I feel like it's already stopped like not working as well as it used to on her. But
so do you, I mean, with the advent of Tzield, with like stuff like that, do you think, oh, I'm going to test my other kids, and if I see this coming, maybe I'll try one of these infusions to hold off type 1? Have you ever considered that?
I have. I just always figured, because I think it's for like age 8, I think is the youngest or something like that. So for me, it always just seems so far off. If she has not developed type 1 or she's early enough in the disease by that age, I would certainly consider it, especially because that's 4 years off from now. So, I mean, it will have been out there for that much longer, more studies, more, people have been on it to see the like efficiency of it. So I would consider it.
It is something you would think about if it came up.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's see. Tzield is approved, you're right, in individuals ages 8 and older who are in stage 2 of type 1 diabetes, which is characterized by presence of 2 or more autoantibodies and abnormal glucose tolerances, but without overt symptoms of diabetes. Okay. Yeah, I mean, stuff like that's coming. And here, that's obviously a drug that exists. And, they say it can hold off the type 1 for hopefully a year or more. And I think they hope it's longer. But I think right now it's FDA approved to say, whatever time they say. I mean, not that I didn't really appreciate your thought process on having more kids, but when the rubber hits the road, you're going to be like, what do we do? And how do we get ahead of this? So I figured you had thought about it already.
Yeah, certainly. And I mean, I didn't know how long it would put off type 1. I mean, a year seems like nothing, like I'm like, well, I don't know.
I hear you.
I don't know. It's a tough choice.
Yeah.
It's a tough choice.
Are there other things that you want to talk about that we haven't thought of?
I don't think so. I guess I have a couple of stories about like my she's had one hypo seizure. My husband had one hypo seizure a few months ago. I don't know if you want any info on that.
I think you're in the right place to tell that story. So go ahead. Sure.
Okay. So my 6-year-old, she had a history of actually febrile seizures from a high fever. And so she has unfortunately had 2 of those. But the first time it happened, we had no idea what was going on. So we tested her blood sugar, of course, thinking it was a hypo seizure. It was not. So that had happened on 2 occasions. And one morning before school, this was when she was in 4K. So she was 4. I dosed her for her breakfast. She wanted a smoothie. So I made her a smoothie. And her phone said she was maybe like 60 or something like that. So the smoothie was almost ready. I gave it to her to drink, and she starts like pushing it away, getting that kind of thrashy attitude that I was describing earlier. And, just really defiant and not listening. And this is one of the first times we actually saw this behavior. So we did not know yet that this was indicative of a low, especially because the phone wasn't even beeping yet. We test her blood sugar. I can't remember what it was, but it was definitely not like 60 like the phone said. She was in the 40s, I think. So the first thing I did, I'm like, okay, well, if I see there's fruit snacks right here, eat these fruit snacks. I figure she would be willing to eat those more than like glucose tablets. Now looking back, of course, glucose tablets are faster. I should have done that. However, I was just trying to appease her and get her to eat something, get something in her body.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, it was too late. She got that far off look in her eye like she has gotten from her febrile seizures. And I knew she was going to have a seizure. So the first thing I did was I picked her up and I like put her in the bathtub, and I told my husband to go get the glucagon. And then I had to swipe out all the fruit snacks out of her mouth because I didn't want her to choke, because she had started eating them, but she hadn't swallowed them all. So I'm trying to remember when like a little baby is choking, how you're got to be really careful at swiping out, the food out of their mouth. So I'm trying to get the fruit snacks out of her mouth. I'm on the phone with 911, go get the glucagon. I administer that to her, get her out of the tub, and just kind of like lay her on her side and just hold her till they got there. And luckily we have the fire department's very, very close to our house. So they were there in less than 5 minutes. And and it was scary. It was unlike the febrile seizures, I would say, just because I know she's going to come out of the febrile seizure. Like, it's never easy to see a seizure, at least with those, she's coming out of it. It's not a health emergency. It's not a medical emergency. Whereas in this one, I'm like pleading with the paramedics, and, they don't know. They're just, I'm like, when is she going to wake up? When am I going to know she's okay? And they're like, we don't know. we're going to have to take her to the hospital for, observation. And so of course that's what they did. She was really sick. She was vomiting everywhere. They get her in the ambulance and they have to cut one of her favorite dresses off of her so that they could give her an IV. We go to our local children's hospital, which is probably about 25 minutes away, but it's the best place for her to be. So that's always the best place to go. And yeah, it probably took at least 3-4 hours for her to completely come out of it. And I had to call the school. Yep, Deanna's not going to be at school today. She had a hypo seizure. And they're like, oh my God. I'm like, I know. But yeah, then after that, she was okay. And I would say she's probably been close. The lowest reading I've had on her since was LO on the meter, which I think is below 20. And that's only happened once. And that was swimming on vacation. So that's always one that's so hard to, okay, every half hour, let's get out of the pool, make sure that your blood sugar is okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was really scary. And I had never seen my husband have a seizure before. And he had them as a kid a couple times, but never in his adult life. And I got home, I took my youngest to lunch. My oldest was in school. I took my youngest to lunch one day, came home, and my husband was in his truck and it was running. So I figured he was probably going to go run an errand or something. But the garage door was shut and he was still in there. So I was not in the garage. He was outside, but the garage door was closed. Like he would have closed it and probably left right away. So I thought it was weird. He was in his car, just sitting there. So I go outside and his hands are like clasped together so tightly. I can't like unclasp them. He's like shivering, like shaking. He's sweating, like drenched in sweat. I can't talk to him. I can't get a response out of him. So I figured he was having a seizure. I couldn't find his phone to see what his blood sugar was. So I went and grabbed a meter, pricked his finger. I think he was in the 40s, which he's been lower, but I think we looked back on it. He had been low for an hour and a half, probably in the 50s and 40s. And again, I'm like, okay, I got my 4-year-old here. She was 3 at the time. I'm like, do I call an ambulance? Do I try to, like I've done in the past, overnight where I've gotten the glucose in his mouth? Do I try to do that? And I figured, okay, I don't know how long he's been like this. I think I just need to get emergency help here. So I called 911. I grabbed the glucagon, and we have the Bexsimi. So for my daughter and for him, we use the Bexsimi. So not actually like the needle. So I get it up in his nose. I'm on the phone with an ambulance because on their way. And then of course because he's an adult and he's behind the wheel of the car. They're like, well, we have to investigate this as, he's unconscious behind the wheel of a car. Like, had he been drinking? Does he have a history of drug use? I'm like, no. I'm like, dude, look at his meter. I just checked it. He's like 42. This is a low blood sugar situation. Yeah. I can guarantee you that's what's going on. But they had to look through his car. They found the Bexsimi. They're like, what's this? I'm like, dude.
It's crack. What do you want from me? Jesus.
Yeah. In a yellow tube. Yeah. I'm like, this is the emergency. I'm like, why don't you talk to your EMS that's here? They'll tell you what it is, because you're probably not going to believe me if you already think he's like a crack addict behind the wheel of the car. So anyway, once we got that all cleared up, and he actually came to in the ambulance before they left the house, but they still took him to the hospital. And he told me, he's like, I remember going down, we have a pretty steep driveway. He's like, I remember going down the driveway and asking, am I dying? Like, am I dying? Where am I? Am I going to die? Because he had no idea what had happened.
Right. As he was coming out of it, going towards the ambulance, he had that thought. Yeah.
Yes. And then
a couple things. Did you ever figure out what led to it?
So I think it's pretty common, especially if you have more than one person wearing a CGM that beeps. There's the alarm fatigue. You hear it, you're like, okay, I'll take care of it in a second. It was during the work day. So he was working. I think he had a meeting because he was supposed to come to lunch with us. And then he said, hey, I got a meeting. I can't come. So I think he was probably in his work meeting and didn't want to leave that to go treat. Of course, looking back, could have prevented things. But, you're like, I'm fine. I'll be good for a few more minutes. And then a few minutes turns into a few more minutes. And like I said, on the CGM, it looked like maybe like 45 minutes to an hour and 15 minutes he was low for.
Yeah.
How long he was out of it, I have no idea, because we were gone. We were out to lunch.
You also don't know how low he really was, even though, you're wearing stuff. It could have been lower. His blood, and it's possible his liver dump some glucagon and help bring him back up again. He could have been much lower than that at some point. So I know he's not on here to talk to, but man, I think he'd like the automated features in an algorithm. They do such a good job of keeping you from getting low.
I agree. And it took him, I think he's only been on the pod for maybe 4 years, maybe, because he has this irrational fear that it's just going to dump like all the insulin that's in his body. So it took him a long time to even go on a pump. So I think he'll get there. He'll trust it enough. He'll get there. He just needs to have that little bit more of control right now, for now. But again, too, this was in February. So looking back, I mean, this could have been his like secondary autoimmune, adrenal insufficiency could have been a factor in this. Because like I said, he's never had episodes like this. These are new within the last 2 years. So it's very likely that maybe this new onset is causing it. Yeah.
If you have questions about that, there are people in the Facebook group who have that as well. I think you'll get a lot of thoughtful answers if you post about it in there.
I actually did a few days ago. And yes, I did get, and I forgot her name. I think it's Sarah.
Yeah.
She was very, very helpful and helped, told me some of the tests that I should have him request. And his endocrinology appointment was originally scheduled for 2.5 weeks from now. And that was my post. I said, hey, this is what just happened. These are his numbers. He's also type 1. He's having his terrible lows. Is 2.5 weeks? I mean, is this like a death sentence in the next 2.5 weeks? Mm-hmm. Like how urgent, how much do I have to push on this? And she was like, you absolutely need to push on this. And we did. And he got in today, which was like 5 days later. So yeah, she was very encouraging. And I know there's a couple podcasts that she dropped for me that talk about the type 1 and Addison's together. So I haven't listened to those yet, but I gave the numbers to my husband too, so he could look them up. And yeah, we'll definitely be listening to those together to learn more about how the two go together and just get some more information.
I hope they help. And I appreciate you doing this. This was really terrific. You were fantastic. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. I'm like, if it helps somebody, great. If not, hopefully at least it was interesting.
No, it was interesting. It was a lot of fun. I don't know why I think this is fun. Somebody said to me the other day, like, what do you do? So it's a weird, I was on vacation and people were like, what do you do for a living? And I'm like, I have a podcast. And it's the same thing every time. Like younger people are like, right on. Those are my goals, baby. You know what I mean? But older people look at you like, wait, you pay a bill with that? Like, you know what I mean? Like it's very interesting, like the response you get back. And I started talking about it and like how much it helps people and like how much I enjoy making it and everything. And I think they were just looking at me like, you enjoy making a podcast about type 1 diabetes? And I was like, no, it's about people and they tell their stories and you get diabetes information inside of the stories. And I know they just stared through me, but no lie, their younger kid that was with them looked at me like I was a baseball player. They're like, that guy makes a living making a podcast. Like, and they realized the generational difference. Like older people look at me like I live in my mom's basement. You know what I mean? It's really interesting. Yeah. But I really enjoy, so I told them, I was like, look, pays my bills. That's great. I love doing it. Like, obviously I'm super chatty. This is perfect for me. And I'm like, and it helps people. Like it sincerely helps a lot of people. I say it's just perfect. Like, I don't think I could do anything that I would enjoy more, and just to think that like this thing happened to your husband and that we actually have episodes that he could listen to help understand that. Like if you would have asked me 10 years ago, do you think one day you'll have content for people to help them if they have Addison's? I'd be like, what is that? But like we just kind of all learning together. And yeah, you did that for somebody today. So I really appreciate it.
I hope so. And yeah, I've learned countless more things from the Facebook group and the podcast than in any medical setting. So I appreciate it too. I mean, I'm happy to provide information, but I'm also more than willing to learn. Yeah. So I've learned a lot. I appreciate that too.
It's my pleasure. It really is. We're definitely still calling this gas station orange juice, though. You totally got
All right, fine. Whatever you want to do. I trust you.
It's the weirdest thing. You were like, you went to the gas station and got me orange juice. And I was like, oh, okay.
People are going to be listening. They're like, what does this have to do with gas station orange juice?
It has nothing to do with that. That's part of the joy. I had a woman tell me the other day, she goes, listen, it's not that I don't enjoy your titles that don't mean anything. She's like, but she goes, but could you write more in the description? And I said, no. It just doesn't make sense to me. Like if I explain the episode, in a description, first of all, most people aren't going to look at it. And the ones who look at it might go, oh, well, I don't need any of that. And then they'll skip it. And then they'll end up missing something that's really could have been valuable for them. So it's a little on purpose. I just want you to have to listen. So
it's part of the mystique, right?
Yeah. I mean, listen, what am I going to do? Also, it's not like anyone's famous. Like, other podcasts get away with just being like, they just put the name of the person in the title. And you go, oh, okay. Steven Spielberg's on today. I know that. And then you can go listen. But I can't say, I'm not saying your last name, but I can't be like, Carly's on today, because people are going to be like, I don't know who that is. So
right. Nobody cares about her.
Yeah. But when you turn on gas station orange juice, it takes you a while to figure out what's going on. By then, hopefully you're hooked and you're listening to the episode. Anyway, that's how I do it. All right. Thank you so much. Hold on 1 second for me. Okay.
Okay.
The conversation you just enjoyed was sponsored by Omnipod 5. You want to get an Omnipod 5? You can. You want to make me happy? Do it with my link, omnipod.com/juicebox. Are you tired of getting a rash from your CGM adhesive? Give the Eversense 365 a try. Eversense CGM.com/juicebox. Beautiful silicone that they use. It changes every day. It keeps it fresh. Not only that, you only have to change the sensor once a year. So, I mean, that's better. Earlier, you heard me talking about Blue Circle Health, the free virtual type 1 diabetes care, education, and support program for adults. And I know it sounds too good to be true, but I swear it's real. Thanks to funding from a big T1D philanthropy group, Blue Circle Health doesn't bill your insurance or charge you a cent. In other words, it's free. They can help you with things like carb counting, insurance navigation, diabetes technology, insulin adjustments, peer support, prescription assistance, and much more. So if you're tired of waiting 9 months to get in with your endo or your educator, you can get an appointment with their team within 1 to 2 weeks. This program is showing what T1D care can and should look like. Blue Circle Health is currently available in Florida, Maine, Vermont, Ohio, Delaware, Alabama, and Missouri. If you live in one of those states, go to bluecirclehealth.org to sign up today. The link is in the show notes. And please help me to spread the word. Blue Circle Health had to buy an ad because people don't believe that it's free. But it is. They're trying to give you free care. If you live in Florida, Maine, Vermont, Ohio, Delaware, Alabama, and Missouri, it's ready to go right now. And like I said, they're adding states so quickly in 2025 that you want to follow them on social media at Blue Circle Health. And you can also keep checking bluecirclehealth.org to see when your free care is available to you. I can't thank you enough for listening. Please make sure you're subscribed or following in your audio app. I'll be back tomorrow with another episode of the Juicebox Podcast. Are you starting to see patterns, but you can't quite make sense of them? You're like, oh, if I bolus here, this happens, but I don't know what to do. Should I put in a little less, a little more? If you're starting to have those thoughts, if you're starting to think, this isn't going the way the doctor said it would, I think I see something here, but I can't be sure. Once you're having those thoughts, you're ready for the Diabetes Pro Tip series from the Juicebox Podcast. It begins at episode 1000. You can also find it at juiceboxpodcast.com up in the menu, and you can find a list in the private Facebook group. Just check right under the featured tab at the top. It'll show you lists of a ton of stuff, including the Pro Tip series, which runs from episode 1000 to 1025. Hey, what's up, everybody? If you've noticed that the podcast sounds better and you're thinking like, how does that happen? What you're hearing is Rob at Wrong Way Recording doing his magic to these files. So if you want him to do his magic to you, wrongwayrecording.com. You got a podcast? You want somebody to edit it? You want Rob.